Be sure to check out Rob Plays. There you can hang out with me while we play video games and talk about life stuff. So as you guys can probably tell from the length of the video, this is a big one. And the reason why is, of course, we missed a video for the last couple days, but that's because I've been trying to find a way to basically bring this whole segment of Hickman's Fantastic Four into order. And the reason why is because if you guys watched my last video, I had basically told you that from that point going forward, things were going to explode. It was going to get absolutely crazy, and Hickman was going to start grabbing these different ties, and he was going to start bringing them all together. And so for those of you guys who were kind of curious about where the whole plot thread of the War of the Four Cities was going to, this is where we find out. We find out this is basically where things are sort of wrapping up. Now again, for those of you guys who didn't see that video, the War of the Four Cities was a premonition given to Valeria Richards, the genius daughter of Reed Richards, by the future version of Franklin Richards. And what Franklin said is that there will be a War of the Four Cities. And we didn't know exactly what it was that he was referring to. At the time, Hickman hadn't really unveiled everything. But as the stories progress so far over the course of our discussions, what we know is that there are groups of Inhumans that exist beyond the Earth. And of course, the Inhumans were experiments by the Kree for the purpose of exposing different races to the Terrigen Mist, who in turn would morph into various races in and of themselves. They might have powers, they might not. They all serve different kinds of purposes, but the goal was to basically use the Inhumans as a way to infiltrate different races across the cosmos, allowing the Kree to take over those races and expand their own empire. That was the premise behind the Inhumans on Earth. What we learned was that our Earth Inhumans were not the only ones. There were other Inhumans from across the cosmos, from across the universe, who had received this same treatment, and they were considered to be the universal Inhumans. And a time had come when they had basically made the argument that it was time for them to take over the Earth, to make Earth their rightful place. Now, as far as I'm aware, Hickman doesn't really give us a reason why, except to say it's just part of the story, and we can just kind of take it, for what it is. We don't really need to read too much into that. But the second of these groups was, of course, the members of the Forever City, which was a city basically created by the High Evolutionary, a man who lived his life according to the premise of evolving himself and others as best he could. And so the result was that he created something called the Ascension Engine, which basically jump-started the evolution of various people who stepped into that city, whether they were extremely primitive in the form of moles themselves, or whether they were human beings. It would basically speed up their evolution to the next stage. Now, the next group after that was, of course, Atlantis. And Atlantis, as we know, or at least those of you guys who are relatively familiar with Marvel Comics know, is that's where Name of the Submariner comes from. Well, of course, because Atlantis had been around for thousands and thousands of years, if not, millions of years, you had old Atlantis, which was ruled by a group of those individuals who held on to old beliefs. And the idea was that they were going to overthrow the new Atlantean Empire led by Name of the Submariner, and they were going to basically take the surface back. And so this led to the whole involvement of Susan Storm being a sort of go-between for Name of the Submariner to deal with the old Atlanteans, and for the old Atlanteans to be kept in check to keep from seeing their plans of taking over the world coming to fruition. Now that said, the fourth group came in the form of Annihilus, his forces that existed in the negative zone, and all they wanted to do was basically open a portal to Earth and to conquer Earth along with the rest of reality. They were pretty straightforward and the easiest to understand. So again, to sort of rehash this, our first group was the Universal Inhumans, our second group were the occupants of the Forever City, our third group was Old Atlantis, and our fourth group was, or I guess is, Annihilus and his forces. Now what we're going to see is that with this coming to fruition, because of the fact that Valeria Richards had accessed the portal that had been created by Reed, whereby he encountered the multiversal versions of himself in the form of the Council of Reeds, when she did this, what we find out is that she basically escaped alongside these other Reeds when the Mad Celestials were still laying waste to the Council Chamber. And so we have about 4 or 5 different versions of Reed from this council who are within the main Earth 616 universe of Marvel Comics. And so what we do here is we pick up with Dr. Doom. We pick up with the fact that he again is basically going to help Reed destroy him, or at least destroy these other Reed Richards. And so once we begin to get into this, we basically see that invitations are being sent out to various people, of course to the High Evolutionary, to Diablo, to the Mad Thinker, to the Wizard. And one thing I'd like you to take note of here is that these invitations are being sent out to some of the most formidable, or at least some of the oldest villains of the Fantastic Four. And there's a reason for this, because of the fact that this council has effectively been assembled for the purpose of defeating Reed Richards. Who better to reach out to than the people who have fought him for so long? And so the idea is to bring all their minds together for the purpose of using their experience to destroy Reed. But what happens is that once this council convenes, the Watcher appears. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, before the Watcher was killed in the original sin leading up to Secret Wars, whenever the Watcher showed up at an event, it meant that shit was gonna pop off, is basically the best way to put it. Things were gonna go crazy, and he always appeared during a time when something would take place that would affect the universe. And this is Reed's reaction. Because of the fact that the Watcher's here, because Valeria was the one who set about the idea of having all these villains come together, of bringing Dr. Doom on for the purpose of defeating Reed, and because of the fact that Valeria had gone through the portal, Reed Richards' reaction is, what has she done? She basically set in motion a series of events that will reshape the entire landscape of the Marvel Universe. And so what we do here is we actually pick up several months after this council originally convenes, and we join with the different versions of Reed Richards from the Council of Reeds as they're going around to these different 4 cities. And initially we pick up with the old Atlanteans, and what we find is that one of these Reeds is creating subversion within the old Atlanteans themselves. Because the Atlanteans were composed of different tribes, what he does is he basically says one tribe was going to betray the other, and he's effectively just planting the seeds of civil war, planting the seeds of dissent among these old Atlanteans. Now from here, we jump to the Forever City, and what happens is we pick up with this version of Reed, who basically says that the entire premise here is to effectively use this ascension engine that was created by the High Evolutionary as an engine of sorts, to basically power a device that they're going to create. Now we'll find out what this device is here in a little bit. At this point, we basically find out that this Reed is meeting with Mole Man, the person who originally discovered this. And the reason why this is important is because there's a lot of manipulation and a lot of subterfuge going on here. What Mole Man says is that the problem he faces is various moloids, that is to say, those weird looking organisms that are subservient to him. They have been leaving him, and they've been going to the Forever City, and they've been having their evolution jump started. And the more this happens, the more moloids leave. And so the bargain that's being struck here is that if Mole Man will basically work with this Reed, then they will effectively, he'll effectively set it up so that his moloids won't leave anymore. They won't be able to access the city. And so what we do at this point is we jump into the realm of another one of the Reeds who's talking to the Universal Inhumans. And what happens is, this is actually a perfect example. I'd like you to keep this in the back of your mind because this will be important for the battle that happens later on. But what happens here is this Reed initially becomes extremely arrogant. And what I mean by that is he goes into the situation not thinking about the consequences. He wants to again be manipulative. He effectively wants to pit the Inhumans in a war against the other 4 cities. That's really where all this comes from. But because of the fact that he's going against a telepath from the Centauri race, who are well known for their telepathic prowess, his mind is read more so than he expects, and they immediately detect subterfuge. And so what happens is they set about basically imprisoning him, interrogating him, studying his mind, and finding out exactly what the full scope of their plan is. And so finally, the last Reed that we pick up with before we begin to wrap back around to events that are currently transpiring is this Reed, this meeting with the Cult of Annihilus. Now again, the Cult of Annihilus was a group that existed within the main Earth 616 universe, but they worshipped the concept of Annihilus. And so once this version of Reed begins speaking with Annihilus himself, the question is, if they help Annihilus, what does he want in return for his help? And so Annihilus says, the only way he'll help this Reed is if Reed opens the portal to the negative zone and then leaves it open, allowing Annihilus's forces to come pouring in. Now again, I know we're kind of grabbing things here, and I know it may seem a little off in terms of where it is that we're coming from and why these things are being done, but what Hickman does is he starts wrapping these different things up together. And what we're told is that these Reeds are basically building something called Saul's Anvil. And Saul's Anvil is a very important concept in Hickman's Fantastic Four, and I want you to keep put this in the back of your head because this will become very important, especially when we start dealing with the situation of Galactus. But what we learn is that in order for Sol's anvil to work the way it's supposed to, it requires a lot of different things. But the reason why old Atlantis was getting special attention was because these reeds required a hyperthermal vent, basically meaning it was a way for them to access water stores or to use superheated water in order to allow the energy that would be put off by Sol's anvil to vent out of the planet instead of simply just blowing that energy down into the planet and then cracking it in two. The other part of this was that they require the Ascension engine to basically power it. They require the Annihilation forces to keep the forces of Reed Richards and the various superheroes of Earth at bay, to keep these individuals from conflicting with their plans, and they required the Universal Inhumans to be another component for this Sol's anvil that would actually allow them to go forward into the universe, beginning to sort of conquer it and for them to serve their purpose. And so what we do here is we jump back to the Council of Doom. We jump back to this gathering of these various villains of Reed Richards' past and their plans to defeat the remainders of the Council of Reeds. And what's really interesting about this is it basically throws into sharp relief the problem that these villains have. Of course, they don't really fight amongst each other. We'll see some of that happen later on. But the bigger issue here is they're not looking at the situation for how it is, they're looking at the situation for how they want it to be. What Reed says here is that Valeria opening that chamber set up a series of events that simply just can't be undone. There's no way to get past this anymore. And the other half of this is that the villains begin looking at it as though they're facing off against Reed Richards himself. But what Reed says is that these members of the council are not like him. They gave up their family, they gave up their friends, they gave up virtually anything that could be used against them. Their singular purpose, their one goal, is to basically take over the universe and then find a way back home and continue their role of controlling the multiverse in and of itself. And so what happens is Nathaniel Richards basically steps up and says, this is their weakness. This is the problem that everybody's not looking at. They're looking at it like they're facing Reed, but they're not. They're facing totally different individuals who have common goals. They have common themes, but the weakness that they have is their desperation. Their weakness is the fact that they want to get back home. And so the easiest way to defeat them is to prevent that from happening. And so while Reed Richards and the various individuals don't necessarily grasp what it is that Nathaniel's saying, Nathaniel says, what is it Reed would do? If Reed were in a situation that he didn't think he could get out of, if Reed were in a situation where he seemed overwhelmed by the events that were transpiring and he wanted a way to sort of let his mind wander in order to keep himself preoccupied but also focus on the variables as well as the facts, what would he do? And Reed says, they're building a machine, which of course we know to be Sol's anvil. And so what happens here is Valeria says, yes, she knows about it. Yes, she knows about that device, but the first step in order for them to acquire this is to basically get to old Atlantis. And so what happens is the Fantastic Four, I guess the Future Foundation at this point, begin to head out to old Atlantis. But while this is happening, Susan Storm has also been summoned to old Atlantis because of the fact that the subterfuge that version of Reed had been working on, the one that had been planting the seeds of civil war, has basically come to fruition, and the old Atlanteans are fighting amongst themselves. And so what happens is that while Susan is there, and while Susan, Spider-Man, and a couple other members of the Future Foundation help to basically fight off these forces, in the end, they appear to be overwhelmed. In addition to this, they're joined by the forces of the Mole Man, and so it's basically a situation where everybody is against the Fantastic Four. But more so than that, because Reed isn't there to necessarily explain everything that's going on, as the conflict begins to unfold, the alternate reality version of Reed Richards, the one that was part of the Council of Reeds and was sowing the seeds of civil war, reveals himself. And to Susan's eyes, this is her husband. This is the actual Reed Richards, and so she's very confused and she's absolutely baffled as to what's going on. And so what happens is this evil version of Reed plays on that. He takes that idea that Susan is momentarily distracted and effectively attacks her. And so while she's temporarily incapacitated, of course she's not severely injured and she's not dead, Spider-Man tends to her, and Alex, one of the members of the Future Foundation, does what he can to basically take out these forces, or at the very least to keep them at bay and to keep them from destroying the city of old Atlantis. And so while he's not necessarily successful, owing to the fact that that version of Reed is able to take old Atlantis away, is able to whisk it away and open up this thermal vent for access, what we do is we pick up with Reed Richards in one of the most dangerous situations that any man could be in, dealing with an angry wife. And so what happens here is, as he's talking to Susan Storm, her question is, when Spider-Man was telling Reed about everything that was going on with that battle, Reed was not really shocked when he said an alternate reality version of himself had taken old Atlantis away. The question she has is why? Why was he not shocked? Why was he expecting to hear something like that? And so he effectively sits down and tells her everything that's going on. He tells her that he opened a portal to basically solve the problem of everything, that he walked through that portal, that he encountered alternate reality versions of himself from all across the multiverse, that they had all abandoned their families, they had left their wives and children, they had left their friends behind, and that the Celestials from an alternate reality had effectively laid waste to that council, and that Reed was not willing to take those same steps, and effectively left. He disbanded or seemed to abandon the council in favor of keeping his family. And so what we do here is we jump to the Forever City of the High Evolutionary. And again, we see more of these Reeds spending time with one another, and this is where the bargain begins to come into play. If these individuals who are part of the Forever City, if they will close their doors off to the Mole Man and to the Moloids who would otherwise seek to enter the city, then these Reed Richards will work on a way to ensure the long-term survival of these members of the Forever City. And the reason why is because with their evolution being jump-started the way that it is, they're still not able to procreate the way they need to because that facet of them just isn't available. It's not worked into their genes. That's one of the reasons why evolution works the way it does, is to ensure things begin moving in a forward direction naturally. But because they were artificially sped up, their bodies don't function right. And so because of that, if these Reeds are able to effectively cure them, then it won't be a problem anymore. In order for them to achieve access to this improvement on their physiology, they also have to basically work on the machine and fix it so that it'll go back to its previous standard. That way the Reeds can enhance it to their desires in order to make it work the way they want it to. And so what happens here is that as they're working on this Soul's Anvil, as they're working on this machine, we're ultimately, met with the return of Earth's Inhumans. And the reason why this matters is because with Earth's Inhumans having been gone during an event called the War of Kings, which dealt with Vulcan, the third Summers brother, who's an Omega level mutant, seizing control of the Shi'ar Empire, and Black Bolt, who led the Kree Empire, waging war against one another, it opened the stage, it opened the platform for the Universal Inhumans to try to acquire Earth in the first place. And so with the Inhumans back, with the Inhumans looking at both these Universal Inhumans as usurpers, as well as the actions of these various Reeds going in direct conflict with what it is that they wanted to achieve, we eventually see that these Inhumans begin to just wage war. They effectively just begin crushing every single person who would otherwise seek to oppose them or usurp their position. Now, this is actually really cool, and the reason why this is interesting is because this is in direct opposition to the kind of Inhuman stories that we're getting right now with Marvel Comics. The Inhuman stories that we're getting at the moment really aren't that great, but this run of the Inhumans give them a dynamic aspect. They give them range, they make them interesting, they make them intriguing because they have motivation, they have desire, as opposed to just kind of being people who were there. But the fact remains that we basically joined the versions of Reed temporarily as the Inhumans start to lay waste to the city, as they just begin killing off every single occupant, every single person that's there. Now, what we do here is we actually take a break for a second and we jump back to the Baxter Building. And I know it really feels like we're jumping around a lot. I know it feels like we're bouncing around a lot, but there's going to be motivation behind this, and there's going to be a reason, because this is going to clear up a lot of stuff and it'll let us move forward without having to worry about any of these lingering things. But picking up with Susan Storm, we see her meeting with Nathaniel Richards. And this is interesting here. It's not a super important thing, but it's interesting here. And the reason why is because it tells us that Susan Storm doesn't really trust Nathaniel. Yes, he is playing it smart. Yes, he's giving them information from the future, but in her mind, the future is not written in stone. The future is not guaranteed. But for Nathaniel, he knows their future is guaranteed. And so in terms of their ideologies, it's the perfect example of an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. But the other half of this, though, is we have to remember that Susan Storm is operating on information given to her by the future version of her daughter Valeria, where Valeria said that dark times are coming, that hard times are coming, and that no matter what happens, Susan is going to have to stay strong. And so to this moment, I guess at the very least, it seems as though this is what Susan is doing. She's staying strong in the face of the fact that it would be so much easier to just give in to Nathaniel and just say, yes, you're right, okay, fine, we'll do whatever you tell us to, as opposed to trying to avoid him or trying to block his every turn. And so what we do here is we transition away from the Baxter building and we pick up with Reed Richards and the Council of Doom after the conflict in the Forever City. And what happens is that as they're going through, of course, they have force fields to protect themselves from the radiation of the Ascension engine, which has been given to them by Dr. Doom. Again, if this force field wasn't there, their evolution would just jumpstart, and who knows how they would turn out. But as they begin to go through and as they begin to investigate, what they also do is they have a plan. And their plan is to effectively take out each individual version of Reed that's present here and to remove them from the situation, to basically conquer their plan. And so as they're going through and as they're pulling these things off, one of the coolest moments in Dr. Doom actually happens here. While Reed Richards is fighting alongside the Council of Doom, he's actually taken away by Medusa and by Lockjaw, who of course is an Inhuman that teleports people away. But during this conflict, Dr. Doom encounters one of the versions of Reed, and Reed initially says, you have no business being here, you have no business, in conflicting with our plans, and Dr. Doom just slaps him across the face and says, do not speak again unless it's to answer my questions. This is not a huge deal, it's not major to the story, it's just great to see Dr. Doom doing this kind of stuff. But while Doom is interrogating this alternate reality version of Reed, he's actually attacked from behind by the Mad Thinker and Diablo. Now, the reason why Hickman gives us this is because while this will go towards, the wrapping up, so to speak, or the tying up of loose ends with regards to the Council of Doom, it's also a great homage to the history of the Fantastic Four, that when it comes down to it, the Mad Thinker and Diablo are very basic. They're B, C, D level villains. They're nowhere near Dr. Doom in terms of popularity or even in terms of capabilities. And this is proven by the fact that Dr. Doom, after being attacked, turns around and he basically says, you would try to kill me with fire. Of all things, they try to kill him with fire. And he turns around and he says, world be damned, Doom endures. And for those of you guys who don't really read comics that much, or this is your first experience with Dr. Doom in Marvel Comics, this is why we as comic book fans love Dr. Doom, because he's got the best lines ever. He's so arrogant, but he's so cool at the same time. And so what happens is that because the Mad Thinker is a villain that prides himself on analyzing the entirety of a situation, because he prides himself on the idea that no one else seems to understand or seems to analyze the same variables he does, and he believes himself to have always come out on top because of that, he tries to pull this with Doom. He basically tries to barter the life of Diablo. He says that if Doom, accounts for the variables that no one expects, if he is a caring and a giving individual, if he's a compassionate person, then that would change the situation. Nobody would see that coming, and Doom should do that. And Doom says no, and he basically just seems to kill Diablo here. And so what happens is that as we jump back to Attilan, as we jump back to the Inhumans, we see, of course, the arrival of Spider-Man, of Nathaniel Richards, and of the main Earth 616 Reed Richards. And this is really interesting here. This is really cool because this is classic Inhumans here. But for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with the previous Inhumans, the way they existed before Secret Wars, you had Black Bolt, who was the leader who couldn't speak because his voice would kill anybody that he spoke to. But you also had Medusa, who spoke for him just by reading his body language and so on and so forth. But with the character of Medusa and with Black Bolt, what we learn here is that their actions of laying waste to everyone that seems to be usurpers is basically just inhuman justice. This is just the way it is. The Inhumans themselves don't really go about, traditional justice the way that we would do it in terms of human society. We don't put people on, or they don't put people on trial. They don't, have them, determined to be guilty or innocent by a jury of their peers. They just kill stuff. They just wipe things out. It's just how they do it. It's really not, something to read too deep into. It's just the way they do things. But the fact remains that with the Inhumans going through and attacking virtually everybody, that the Wizard and his advanced idea mechanics henchmen seem to vacate. They seem to basically bail out. And so what we do here is we pick up with a High Evolutionary who gets to the Ascension engine, and he says that this has basically been modified, it's been adjusted. Yes, it's been adjusted beyond his expectations, but it doesn't serve the purpose that it was originally designed to serve anymore. It's basically been transformed into a power source. And so while there are a few things that happen here and there, while Reed Richards is basically made to look on and watch as the events unfold in the Forever City, we of course see the insane brother of Black Bolt, Maximus the Mad, going going through and attacking people, and this is just kind of some fun stuff. This is really just a little bit of a filler things that are given in here, but overall, the arc here is that the various versions of Reed, almost all of them are defeated. They're basically defeated and taken prisoner by the Inhumans. And the reason why I say almost all is because while Doom is initially invited to the Inhuman city, he of course turns it down. And the reason he turns it down is because he spots one of the Reeds who has not been captured yet, who's basically watching the events unfold. Now, something I'd like you to take note of is, for those of you guys who have not been watching or not seen my Hickman video so far, yes, this version of Reed has an Infinity Gauntlet, but because he's in a universe that's not his own, the Infinity Gauntlet doesn't work here. Why he continues to wield the Infinity Gauntlet, I'm not really sure. It seems to be a part of his character in the same way that Professor X has a wheelchair, that Dr. Doom has a metal suit. It's just part of who he is, but it also helps us to distinguish between this version of Reed from the Council of Reeds and our main Earth 616 Reed. But what ends up happening is that while Doom goes against this version of Reed, that version of Reed responds by saying that he's fought Doom countless times. You know, he's fought an infinite number of Dooms on an infinite number of worlds. He knows every move that Doom is going to make before he even makes it. And this is interesting because with Dr. Doom as a villain, he prides himself on his intelligence. But what this version of Reed is saying is that Doom is predictable, that he's really not as smart as he believes he is, that if given enough time, he himself is nothing if not a series of patterns. He's nothing if not a guy that just does the same thing over and over again, which is actually Hickman telling us this is the reason why Doom gets beat all the time, because he keeps using the same schemes all the time. But the fact remains that this Reed uses one of those collars that was used to turn all the versions of Dr. Doom into vegetables, and he puts it around Doom's neck. But what we also learn is that the collar does not automatically turn a person into a vegetable. Instead, he turns the collar down so that Doom is effectively just made his slave under the threat that if Doom does not do what he's told, that the collar is going to be turned up to max power. And so again, what we do is we go back to the city of Attilan, and we pick up with Reed and we pick up with Nathaniel and Spider-Man as this entire conflict is sort of wrapped up. And so for those of you guys who may have gotten a little confused or a little lost in the conversation so far, the overall gist here is that the Reeds of the Council were basically creating Saul's Anvil, a way to open a dimensional rift in order to access their own world and in order to access the Council, but the only way they could do that was to use aspects of the four cities. And so while they attempted to do what they could by implanting subterfuge, in the end, they were defeated when the Inhumans showed up and just cleaned house. And so with this event coming to an end, or at least with this aspect of the story coming to an end, what we find is that Reed, Nathaniel, and Spider-Man are presented with Eldrak. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, not all Inhumans who were exposed to the Terrigen Mist become powerful people. Not all of them become like Black Bolt or Medusa. Some of them become the dog Lockjaw, others become Eldrak, which is a door that takes you wherever you need to be. It doesn't mean that it'll take you where you want to go, it'll take you where you need to go. And so it basically reads you on a very subconscious level, but there's also some veiled illusions here that maybe the door of Eldrak also understands, you know, the future, or it understands how things will turn out, and it basically takes you where you need to go in accordance to how the universe is supposed to unfold and what future events are going to be taking place. Again, Hickman doesn't give us a whole lot here on this. We're kind of left to our own devices to interpret exactly how the door functions with regards to the need of the person that travels through it. But the fact remains that once Reed and Nathaniel and Spider-Man go through this door, we pick up with Reed Richards and his arrival back at the Baxter Building. Now, this is extremely important to the future of events that happen, especially during Nathaniel's conversation with Reed Richards, which will actually probably be coming here in the next, 2 or 3 videos or so. And what happens is once he gets back to the Baxter Building, he's there with Susan, and he tells her everything that's going on, the entire conflict with the Inhumans, how they went through Eldrak, and Eldrak took them where they needed to be, and he says that apparently he just needed to be here. He just needed to be with his wife. And this is a big deal, because what Susan says is that by reiterating what Valeria told her, that dark days are coming, and that even if Valeria had not visited Susan Storm, and even if Valeria had not told Susan Storm that dark days were coming, Susan would know it simply just by intuition. And that's a legitimate claim. I wouldn't go as far as to say Susan Storm has precognition or anything like that, but I will say that she seems to have always been accurate in terms of her ability to perceive that things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And so what she tells Reed, and again, this is extremely important, that Reed seems to have gotten lost in his attempt to solve the problem of everything, with the realization that the Council of Reed members, or at least some of them, had made it into his universe, the attempt to stop him, that maybe he's fighting a losing battle, that maybe these events are just supposed to unfold, and all Reed can do is watch them unfold to their fruition and then try to stop some final event that occurs at some point in the future. Now again, this is something that I really want you to keep in the back of your head, because we will reference this, especially when we see the return of the adult Franklin Richards. But because of the fact that the actions of these various Reeds still leave on the chess table the possible invasion of Annihilus, it brings to light the fact that the Earth itself is still in extreme danger. And so what happens is that while Ben Grimm had departed the Fantastic Four for a time to basically kind of focus things in light of Johnny Storm dying, what he does is he returns at the behest of Spider-Man, but he brings the Avengers with him. And so what we do here is we pick up in the Baxter building itself, and we basically join Reed Richards. And all Reed really does is effectively explain everything that's going on. He tells them everything that's happening, the fact that Dr. Doom appears to have been taken prisoner by one of the Reeds. He tells them about the Council. He tells them about all these events unfolding, and that while Reed did what he could, while he did what he thought was the right thing to do, this is ultimately all just backfired. And so he's effectively assembled the Avengers, or at least a huge number of the Avengers, in order to combat this threat. And we see the creme de la creme of Marvel Comics here, some of the most powerful and popular Avengers. We of course see Iron Man, we see Luke Cage, Iron Fist, we have Carol Danvers, we have Wolverine, we have Red Hulk, we have Doctor Strange. We have some pretty powerful folks here, with regards to their own right. We also see a few X-Men, and this really presents a circumstance whereby things could really begin to go crazy. Things could really begin to pop off. And the reason why I say that is because during the event of War of Kings, the Supreme Intelligence had been destroyed. And if you guys recall my discussion on the Inhumans, we had talked about how the Supreme Intelligence had the entire Inhuman project decommissioned because of the fact that the Inhumans would at some point in the future rise up against the Kree Empire and destroy it. And so what happens is with these versions of Reed being taken prisoner by the Inhumans themselves, they're effectively handed over to Ronan the Accuser, who is really like the steward of the Kree Empire, while Black Bolt is not there. And so these two Reeds are handed over to Ronan the Accuser, and they are brought together. Their minds are effectively melded together, and they are transformed or transmogrified into the Supreme Intelligence. And so because the Supreme Intelligence has basically returned and encompasses all the knowledge of all the Kree rulers that have ever existed, he also now has the knowledge of these two Reed Richards to go along with it, meaning this Supreme Intelligence is now knowledgeable on a multiversal scale, not just a universal scale. But the fact remains that because of the fact that the Supreme Intelligence had been dead for so long, that in the end, the goal is to still destroy the Inhumans. And so what happens is the Supreme Intelligence sends forth the armada of the Kree race, sends them all towards the planet Earth. And this comes on the heels of the Avengers going forward with the intention of facing off against the forces of the Annihilation Wave, assuming they advance, facing off against the remainders of the various members of the Council of Reeds who are still running around the planet Earth. And so in response to the fact that the Kree could very well destroy the entirety of the human population, Reed Richards basically sends out an SOS. And in response to this SOS is the arrival of Galactus. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end, and the reason why is because those of you guys who read Hickman's Fantastic Four, you guys know that in the next video, which will be out tomorrow, things get crazy. Anyway, guys, we're going to wrap this up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think about Hickman's Fantastic Four so far, because if you guys have had a few jaw-dropping moments so far, it ain't nothing compared to what comes out in the next video. I know you guys hate cliffhangers. I'm sorry. I got to do it to you. But yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.